Hello, everyone. I see we're over 130 participants, so we'll
Bonjour à
get
tous,
started
je vois qu'il y a déjà plus de 130 participants. Nous allons donc commencer.
about grassroots experiences in accessing digital social services and education. My name is Soraya Foss-Phillips, and on behalf of ATD Fourth World, I'm very happy to welcome you all today. I see many of you have written in the chat box where you're joining us from, so please feel free to keep doing that. We have many different parts of the world represented. Before I give the floor over to our wonderful moderator, Virginia Eubanks, just a small technical note. We have interpretation available from English to French. You just have to click the little globe icon at the bottom right of your screen. We want to give a special thanks to our interpreters, Lucille and Steve, for offering their services. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue à notre événement en ligne sur le thème des expériences d'accès aux services sociaux et à l'éducation dans un monde de plus en plus digital. Juste une note technique avant de passer la parole à notre modératrice. Pour les francophones, vous pouvez activer l'interprétation en français en cliquant sur l'icône du globe en bas à droite de votre écran. Quand vous cliquez sur le globe, vous allez voir trois options, Off, English et French. Il faut que vous sélectionnez l'option French pour entendre la traduction en français. Et un grand merci à nos interprètes Lucille et Steve pour leur service. Je vais maintenant présenter notre modératrice et vous pourrez entendre l'interprétation en français. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator. Virginia Eubanks is an associate professor of political science at the State University of New York. She is the author of Automating Inequality: How High-Tech Tools Profile, Police, and Punish the Poor, as well as Digital Dead End: Fighting for Social Justice in the Information Age. In her highly influential book, Automating Inequality, Virginia Eubanks systematically investigates the impacts of data mining, policy algorithms, and predictive risk models on poor and working class people in the United States. Virginia Eubanks' expertise lies at the intersection of technology and social justice, and she has worked in community, technology, and economic justice movements for over 2 decades. Virginia, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to moderate this event. Passing the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Soraya. And good morning and good afternoon and good evening et bonjour et bonsoir from my beautiful home in South Troy, New York, to you wherever you are, from India and Indianapolis, from Northern Ireland and Nice, from Congo and Canada, Philippines and Philadelphia. We welcome you and so appreciate your time and your attention for this event tonight. As Soraya said, I'm Virginia Eubanks, and I'm an author of 2 books that directly address the Commission's theme this year. So the role of digital technologies in social development and well-being. The first book, Digital Dead End, which was published more than a decade ago now, was based on 5 years of participatory action research with a community of women who lived in a single room occupancy hotel in my hometown of Troy, New York. And in that book, poor and working class women explained to me and to readers that they faced what they saw as twin technological challenges. The first was a lack of access to digital tools for education, for communication, for political participation. But second was they felt like they were overly accessed by new digital technologies that they believed were forms of social control, especially in the welfare or the social insurance system and in criminal justice. So in the second book that I wrote, Automating Inequality, I expanded on that second concern, looking at how new digital tools in public assistance, homeless services, and child protective systems across the United States profile, police, and punish the poor. So I'm especially thrilled to be here among these extraordinary panelists and experts today, and I'm honored to serve as the moderator for this conversation. So the theme that ATD Fourth World has chosen, Beyond the Screen, Grassroots Experiences, Accessing Social Services and Education in a Digital World, could not be more pressing in the moment that we're all living through right now. So as applications of technology have expanded, numerous governments are digitizing citizen-state interactions. They're attempting to improve efficiency and even to sometimes overturn long-standing biases in their bureaucracies and government processes. And these systems are intended to improve lives, but they may produce new barriers. So for example, with education moving online due to COVID-19, families that lack devices or internet service or electricity suffer from an additional layer of inequality, leading to increased exclusion. And even if those physical barriers are overcome, even if people get access to devices and network connectivity, individuals living in poverty still face challenges when services such as family court hearings are digitized or brought online. So algorithmic and design bias pose very serious threats to the realization of justice and social protection and lead to new kinds of dehumanization, stigma, and discrimination. So the panel today brings together activists with lived experiences of poverty, academics working on the digital welfare state, and member state representatives proposing meaningful and promising practices. So I'm thrilled to be here to help facilitate the conversation on how digital transformation of government services impacts the rights, the dignity, the well-being of all people, especially that of individuals and families with lived experience of poverty. So I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker, Esther Rodriguez, who will contribute a taped statement, but she is here and will be available for questions and conversation during the Q&A portion of our time together. So please feel free to pose questions to any of the panelists in the Q&A box. We'll be collecting them and including them at the appropriate time. So thanks so much for doing that, because we really want to hear what you have to say. So to introduce Esther, she's from the San Carlos Apache tribe in Arizona and has been living in Gumerco, New Mexico for 21 years. She's been a facilitator in ATD Fourth World's weekly Story Garden program for more than 3 years, a community champion in the McKinley County Early Childhood Coalition for 2 years. And she constantly brings her knowledge as a parent raising several of her grandchildren and as a committed community member helping others in discreet and efficient ways to her important work. Her understanding of persistent poverty makes her a knowledgeable advocate for better living conditions and for better support to families. So Esther, take it away.
My name is Esther V. Rodriguez. I'm a Native American and I reside at Gumerco, New Mexico, USA. Here in Gumerco, we do have internet, but it's slow. We have one store and one gas station and a bus that comes twice a day. Gumerco is mainly trailers and homes, and it's hard to make friends. So we are more or less isolated. I live 3 miles from Gallup, where my grandchildren are registered for school. I'm in charge of 3 grandchildren who are doing online classes since August. One granddaughter is 8, the other is 13, and my grandson that just turned 18. They receive a tablet or a laptop from school. I had Wi-Fi access to the school program, but my bill went up to $189, which I couldn't afford. When I got the portable hotspot from the elementary school, my bill went down. And each of my grandchildren experienced some challenge with online class. My 8-year-old granddaughter is frustrated. One time she could not put an answer, and there was nothing wrong with the computer. She has good internet access, but when her teacher started teaching from home, the online class sometimes crashed. Also, the online class goes too fast for students who need help and too slow for my granddaughter. She really likes school, and now she just says, how many more days until school is out? I'm so bored. Last year she was in school, she was reading and she was helping the teacher with other students. And now it's like she's giving up. Why should I learn? We're stuck at home. When she was in school, she wanted to be #1 in her class. That gave her motivation to be alert, to do everything right. Because now during math, I see her doodling. Her teacher is not with her and cannot see her drawing. And my granddaughter, who is 13, is not really doing her work because she is not getting the help she needs. She's in special ed because she needs to be taught one-on-one, and she is visual, not on the computer, but with a person. Then she will understand. But online class is something goes on in the house, she gets distracted and she's failing. Last year she was really doing good in school. Now she got 3 Fs and she really says, I don't get it. At school she was doing a lot better because she was in a small group. Because right now when she's online, it's a full class. It really wants, she doesn't really want a lot of kids to know that she is in special ed. My grandson is in the 12th grade and has to think about college right now. There are some information from school that he could get a scholarship, but not where he could get it from. I haven't heard the school counselor reach out to him. Because of these challenges for my grandchildren, I put a lot of time and energy to help them. Which one in the 2nd grade says, I'm so dumb, I don't even know how to spell. But I tell her, but you're learning. You know all these words, take your time. The words that you don't know, write them down. You can spell them. Also, when I see her drawing during math class, I think that maybe I could try a different way when she's drawing clothes. I'm going to start using her math. I'll say if you're going to make a shirt, you will need to learn how to measure and use the numbers and how much material you need. And it's just not drawing. Hopefully that will work. But sometimes I don't know what they're talking about on online class. I tell my granddaughter, I don't know and I don't have a clue. I am not a good reader and there are some words that I don't know myself. I want to be there for my other granddaughter. She has that pride. It really gets to her to know that she has a learning disability. I tell her, you overcome it. She says no, so I just keep encouraging her. For my grandson, I found information about the scholarship on TikTok, also about the Navajo scholarship, but we need to live on the reservation. And I don't know my grandson wants to do next year. I need to sit down and talk to him and what he really wants to do. At the end of the computer technology was the only way for my grandchildren to continue their schoolwork, but it's created many new challenges for them and for me. My grandchildren are all know that I have their back, and I think family ties are helping them to get through their challenge.
Thank you so much to Esther. I have lots of questions that I'm eager to follow up on when we get to the Q&A portion of our time together. So just a reminder to please feel free and put questions in the Q&A box for any of our panelists. Esther, thank you so much for the work you do and for sharing your experience with us. And we look forward to hearing more from you a bit later. So I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Tammy Mays. She's a parent activist with ATD Fourth World in the UK. She has extensive experience in delivering poverty-aware training to social workers and is an active member of both the Parents, Families, and Allies Network, or PFAN, and the International Parent Advocacy Network. So Tammy, please take the stage.
Hi, my name is Tammy Mays. I'm an activist in the UK with ATD Fourth World, and I'm fighting against poverty and for human rights. I'm also part of the Parents, Families, Allies Network, which is PFAN for short. At PFAN, we're parents, social workers, academics, all fighting for change.
Des travailleurs sociaux, des universitaires travaillent ensemble pour un meilleur système de protection. Notamment dans le cadre de la protection des enfants. En mars dernier, le système judiciaire des États-Unis, du Royaume-Uni, a dû tout faire en ligne à cause des restrictions du Covid. La consultation donc, des parents dans le cadre des affaires au tribunal a dû se faire en ligne également. J'ai fait partie d'un groupe de recherche, j'ai travaillé avec les parents. Nous avons tous notre propre expérience des systèmes de protection, services de protection de l'enfance. Nous avons interrogé
half in focus groups on Zoom and half individually by telephone. Myself and other parent activists from PFAN led the interviews and the focus groups. People would sign up to take part. We would find a time that suited them and send a link privately. There would be a small group of us online. We would do introductions and then ask questions following a questionnaire that we had. The interviews took 1 hour, but we always had breakout rooms if needed because the subject was so hard for a lot of people. We could quickly realise that the focus groups were a chance for parents to offer support, encouragement and understanding to one another. So we always made sure that there was plenty of time for people to just talk and connect with one another. Doing things this way meant we had a more chilled environment that put parents at ease and allowed them room to say exactly what they wanted to. It is important to feel safe and comfortable when talking about something so sensitive. It was the same when we did the phone interviews. We spent a long time just listening and offering support. What we did, we learn. We found that parents had severe problems with their legal representations and felt their hearings were inhumane and unfair. The impact of the digital exclusion on standards of justice for parents, many of whom are in poverty and extremely vulnerable, was very clear. The consequences of these difficulties for parents were diabolical. Everything is more difficult. When you are not tech literal and you don't have the support you need. One mother who had one child removed but still had 2 at home was in the middle of a fact-finding proceedings. Stuff was said that wasn't true, but she couldn't tell her solicitor because they weren't in the same physical room and she had no way of communicating with them. Then the decision was made that the child who had been removed was not coming home. Then she had to go into the living room and stay strong for her other 2 children that were at home. She had no support. There was another mother who had to listen to the court hearing on her phone and then use her partner's phone to speak to her solicitor. They didn't have the money for a laptop or a tablet. A lot of the parents I spoke to could not afford laptops or tablets and were using their phones. A lot of them couldn't afford internet, so had to borrow money from friends and family so they could go online and attend their cases. They had no support from social services. They were left on their own. with no support and without the right devices to use. It was heartbreaking hearing what the parents were going through. The things wrong with the system really do need to change. How can they make decisions during lockdown about where a child lives? Some parents didn't even know who was on the video call due to having such a small screen, but they couldn't see everyone. In one case, the internet kept cutting out, and the judge themselves didn't know who was on the call. How is that right? Privacy is a big concern during remote hearings. Who is actually on the call? Who else can hear what is being said? Sometimes because a solicitor or social worker had their children at home, because the schools are closed, their kids appeared on cameras in the background. Parents in crammed living conditions couldn't easily protect their own children from hearing the proceedings. This all shows that confidential cases cannot be confidential while in someone's home. I am lucky that my family's court case finished in February of 2020, before the pandemic happened. There are issues with the court procedure when face-to-face, let alone with them being online. I was thankful that ours had stopped before the pandemic. I would not have coped with it being online. It was hard enough face-to-face. One thing I found when doing the research was how many did not have good internet or even have internet, and they weren't offered internet. Many of the parents lived in poverty. They can't afford the internet and so got into debt. More needs to be done on this. It is not right. Then they didn't have the correct devices and couldn't afford to go out and buy the stuff they needed. Where are the funds to help these parents? I don't think any case, unless it's a matter of life and death, should be heard online. It is not a fair system. Parents can't see the expressions on people's faces, and the judges can't see the face of the parents or the body language of any of them. For more information, you can see them on the PFAN website and also on the Nutfield Observatory website. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that powerful testimony. I've done a lot of work on child protective services in the United States, and I think we'll have a vigorous conversation towards the end of our time together. I want to remind folks that they can put questions for any of our panelists in the Q&A box or in the hat box. And I'm excited to introduce the next segment of our conversation, which is a compilation of videos from ATD Fourth World members living in poverty in France and in New York.
Patrick Lubin, ATD Fourth World. Quand j'étais dans la rue, le téléphone portable m'a permis de sortir de l'isolement et de communiquer avec les personnes de mon entourage. Il m'a permis aussi de m'informer de ce qui se passe dans ce monde et de pouvoir appeler des endroits où on peut peut-être m'aider, comme les églises, comme les associations, les organisations, et surtout aussi de pouvoir maintenir ce contact qui est très important pour ne pas se sentir seul. J'ai pu aussi continuer les programmes grâce à la technologie digitale avec ATD Fourth World.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Pascal, je suis militant ATD Fourth World Lyon et je viens vous parler de la technologie numérique, car j'ai des difficultés pour suivre ma formation qui est à distance, car j'habite dans un foyer et non pas la Wi-Fi.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Chantal, je suis militant de Lyon. Je vais vous parler de ce que je peux faire grâce à la numérique. La technologie numérique m'aide à communiquer en envoyant des mails, m'aide à écouter de la musique en allant sur YouTube et en regardant et en regardant mes photos, en faisant des dossiers.
Je m'appelle Doris, je suis militante à Lyon. Je vais vous parler d'une des failles numériques que je rencontre. Étant pupille de l'État, je ne possède pas les dates de naissance de mes géniteurs, ce qui est une condition pour faire une demande d'acte de naissance en ligne.
Thanks so much to everybody who was involved in that video. I am excited now to introduce to you Christian van Veen, who is the director of the Digital Welfare State and Human Rights Project at the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice at NYU School of Law. Christian's research focuses on the impact of the digitalization of government on human rights, especially in the area of the welfare state. So from 2014 until 2020, he served as first senior advisor and then special advisor on new technologies to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. Christian?
Thank you, Virginia. And thanks to ATD Fourth World for organizing today's panel, and also thanks to everyone who's joining us from around the world. Thank you. Merci beaucoup à tous. So the project that I lead that Virginia just mentioned, we started working on that project because we perceived there to be a few gaps in both the human rights and more specific digital rights field. First, the general mainstream human rights field has, surprisingly enough, only quite recently started investigating the digital transformation of the state and of its impact on social rights, especially. Secondly, that human rights field, when it has addressed issues at the intersection of the state and digitalization, tends to still prioritize issues such as the right to privacy, data protection, freedom of expression, and especially how that affects middle-class individuals in most societies. And relatedly, and finally, we think that there has been a general disregard about investigating and addressing how digitalization of the state is affecting individuals living in poverty, and how this process is affecting them differently than other groups. Now, for today's panel, and we've already heard powerful testimony on that point, I think the main lesson I've learned in the last few years working on these issues is that if we do not make a serious effort to learn more about how people living in poverty experience the digitalization of the welfare state, how it's affecting them, then it's a virtual guarantee that those groups will not see any of the benefits that are promised when government services are digitalized. And you can flip that statement on its head and make it more dark. If we continue to ignore the impact of the digital state on those living in poverty, I think it's almost guaranteed that they will face new and often very disturbing violations of their rights. And we've already heard a few examples of that. Now, I think that the lack of interest of the state in poorer groups and how they are affected by digitalization, for instance, of education and of benefit systems, leads to very grievous design flaws in a lot of these systems. And to name just one example, and I think Tammy also mentioned this just now, if you expect welfare beneficiaries to claim their benefits online, then you need to take into account, for instance, that in certain parts of the world, people living in poverty are more likely to go to those websites via a phone, not via a laptop. And at the same time, many government benefit systems do not take that sort of reality into account at all. So just one example, I was reading the New York Times this weekend, and there was a story there about a single mom who's trying to access benefits when the pandemic hit and she lost her job. And it says, Miss Stewart, at a low point in late October, suddenly her jobless aid stopped again. She discovered she had accidentally closed her case while reviewing it on her phone. I think this is just one example of many. And then we see again and again that hardly any resources are invested by the state in making sure that digital interfaces, digital systems are designed in such a way that it takes into account their lived experience, their lives, and the impact that digitalization is having on these groups. So just to name one other example, the World Bank and other international organizations are making billions of dollars of investments over the last few years in so-called digital ID systems. So digitized versions of identity documents, among other things, with the promise that this will lead to the digital inclusion of the poor. At the same time, just this year in their annual report, the World Bank ID4D, Identity for Development team writes, given that this topic, the topic of exclusion of certain groups from digital ID systems, is relatively new to the development agenda, empirical research that rigorously evaluates the impact of ID systems on development outcomes and the effectiveness of strategies to mitigate risks has been limited. Now, if you let that sink in for a moment, billions of dollars invested, this is supposedly a good thing for poor people, yet the World Bank this year concludes in its own report that they actually don't know that much about the impact that these systems are having on the most vulnerable. So let me end by saying that none of these problems are, of course, new to digitalization. The poor, over a long history, have very often been ignored in the design of policies that are most relevant to them. At the same time, digitalization is highly relevant because the impact on the life of poor individuals may be different and more egregious than the analog systems that came before them. And I think what we need to do is get out of this hallelujah mode where everything that is digital is somehow better, especially for those who need the state most, and really get serious about investigating how poor people can profit from the benefits of digital technology too, and get much more serious about the potential risks that are involved for their lives.
Thank you so much, Christian, for your powerful work and that great analysis. So next, we're going to see a short video that shares grassroots experiences with digital voting in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Moi, c'est Shahidi Mouigiro Mwarabu, je suis membre du mouvement ATD Fourth World. En 2018, pour les élections, une grande innovation a été introduite. En RDC, nous avons utilisé la machine à voter pour élire le président, les députés nationaux et provinciaux. Comment s'assurer alors que la machine à voter sera une chance pour tous d'exprimer son choix politique? Le mouvement ATD Fourth World avait organisé une formation et un débat sur la machine à voter et les droits de vote.
Je ne connaissais rien sur la machine à voter. J'entendais seulement parler d'elle, mais je ne m'y intéressais pas. Je pensais aussi que le vote concernait plus les hommes parce que ce sont eux qui aiment trop de la politique. Aujourd'hui, avec le débat que nous avons eu ensemble, je viens de réaliser que les élections concernent tous les citoyens d'un pays. Le 23 décembre, je ne vais pas manquer d'aller voter.
Thank you so much. So I'm happy to introduce our fourth speaker, Mr. Jungho Shin, from the Permanent Mission of South Korea to the UN. He assumed his current position as Second Secretary of the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations on August 5th, 2020. During his over 10-year diplomatic career, he served in various positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Korea. These include, among others, Deputy Chief of the Mission at the Embassy of the Republic of Korea to the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste from 2018 to 2020, and Second Secretary of North Korean Nuclear Affairs Bureau from 2014 to 2016. Mr. Shin graduated from the Department of International Politics at Seoul National University in 2012. He received an MA in International Affairs from Fudan University in Shanghai in 2016. He's married and he has 2 daughters. Mr. Shin.
Thank you, Virginia, for giving me the floor and for your kind introduction. Dear colleague, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I hope that you all staying healthy and safe during these uncertain times. I'm Jungho from Republic of Korea Mission. First of all, I'd like to sincerely thank you, ATD Fourth World, for giving me the opportunity to share Korea's experience, especially in its effort to bridge the digital divide and use the digital technology to provide social services. I'd like to begin by highlighting two key aspects are important in bridging the digital divide and promotion digital inclusion, which are accessibility and digital literacy. These include improving access to information communication technology, ICT, including high-speed internet and digital devices, as well as enhancing citizens' skills and ability to use them. I was also able to recognize the importance of accessibility of the ICT during my previous post in Timor-Leste, witnessing the country suffering from the lack of access to social services, including access to education. Many of my Timor-Leste friends and I agree that a robust broadband infrastructure would help the country to address these challenges and empower its citizens to build a more prosperous and inclusive society. While Korea is one of the top countries in the 2020 United Nations e-government ranking and has an internet penetration rate of 96%, this accomplishment did not happen overnight. The Korea government had to take a concrete step in partnership with the various stakeholders with the active public engagement to build a robust broadband infrastructure and bridge the digital divide. Since the installing a nationwide broadband system cannot be solely depend on private sector, the government implemented a series of measures in order to achieve this. In 1996, our government enacted a Beijing law for promoting digitalization, stipulating that it is the duty of the government to manage and install broadband connection. With the launch of this law, my government has done a full-fledged investment on improving the country's digital infrastructure. Moreover, my government carried out a series of initiatives since the mid-1990s, including Cyber Korea 21, Korea Vision, aiming to build and strengthen its broadband infrastructure. Recognizing the importance of addressing the issue of digital divide, my government established a Korean Agency for Digital Opportunity and Promotion, which is called KADO, in 2003, in accordance with the Digital Divide Closing Act, to provide support for the vulnerable groups. Now merged with the National Information Society Agency, NIA, it helps the vulnerable group to increase its access to and use of information and communication services. This agency not only distributes used computer to underprivileged and developing countries, but also collecting relevant data to track digital divide index to regularly assess the situation of the digital divide in the country and improve existing policies. Based on 2019 statistical figure published by NIA, 90.1% of Korean people in vulnerable group have access to the internet. Accessible internet has helped Korean citizens in their transition to unpacked or contact-free digital environment during these challenging COVID-19 times. Even in the most remote island in Korea, citizens can virtually communicate with their medical doctor, and students can access the e-learning system. In terms of ensuring access to education during COVID-19, the government has expanded its public infrastructure by increasing the capacity of e-learning platform and provide free rental digital device to thousands of students with a priority given to low-income households. Private-public partnership also enable the distribution of large number of digital devices to disadvantaged students, and the government also offer free temporary access to educational websites and special support for students with disability, which include provision of the assistive technology device, educational content in Braille, sign language, and captions, and home visits. While governments build infrastructure that ensure high-speed and affordable internet for its citizens, it automatically creates opportunity for citizens to maximize their use of ICTs, whether it be access to social service, commercial use, or education. However, we have to recognize that improving accessibility does not completely solve the issue of the digital divide. There are people who are unable to make the use of a digital system simply due to lack of knowledge and skill on the use of ICT. Again, let me tell you a personal story that made me realize the importance of digital literacy. When I was a student in China, I have seen people in the streets begging for money, asking people to give through a QR code on their mobile device. On the other hand, when I was in Timor-Leste, government officers had a MacBook laptops, a beautiful and expensive one, but they were always left unused. When I asked about the reason, they replied that it was simply because they didn't know how to use them. As such, digital literacy matters. Without digital literacy, accessibility becomes useless. In this regard, let me share some of efforts our government has been taking in order to enhance digital literacy and bridge the existing digital divide. As early as 1984, my government established training center to educate the public on how to use ICTs and start offering free computer classes for people in rural areas since 1998. My government has continued providing digital literacy education for all, including on how to use digital device and ways to access online services with a special focus on vulnerable groups, including people with a disability, older person, rural dwellers, and low-income households. The Korean government has transformed traditional local government offices into literacy learning center and continues its work to create a more digitally inclusive society. In addition, the use of mobile devices such as smartphone is known to enhance one's digital literacy. For this reason, the Korean government continues to provide smartphone to all the persons and people living in the rural area in order to enhance their digital literacy. Finally, persons with disabilities face particular challenges in using digital devices. To alleviate the difficulties faced by the person with disabilities, the NIA operates a relay call service 24 hours for 7 days for people with hearing and speech impairment. A team of operators relay the message they receive through the text or sign language via webcam to the intended recipients. In addition, NIA offers accessibility guidelines for the use of computer, the internet, and cell phones. For the person with a disability that requires assistive devices such as software that moves the mouse cursor with a flick of an eye, the agency subsidizes up to 80% of the cost. We want to ensure that physical limitation will not be a barrier to digital literacy, so our governments continue to develop ways to assist the person with disabilities. When you take a subway in Seoul, for instance, you can enjoy free high-speed internet. The use of digital technology is intrinsically linked to daily lives of Korean people. They conveniently access governmental, medical, educational, and commercial services online. However, this was made possible through the government's continued commitment to build a broadband infrastructure and partnership with the various stakeholders and high-level active public engagement. When the government built the era for all and set rules and encourage all of them to participate, the citizens are empowered and contribute in creating a more inclusive and proper society. We had a strong belief in the power and creativity of our citizens. While challenges still remain in addressing the issue of digital divide, our government endeavors to continue its effort to create more digitally inclusive society and also help other developing countries to build their digital infrastructure and promote digital literacy. Thank you for kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shin, for your really profoundly interesting experience with these programs in South Korea. So I have the great privilege now of transforming this from a one-way communication to a multi-way communication and a conversation among our panelists who all have shared extraordinary experiences, analysis, and thoughts about the role of digital technology in our lives today. What I think I'd like to do is several things. I have one large question for sort of all members of our panel to respond to if they'd like. I will then ask panelists if they have questions for each other, so we have an opportunity to sort of share our insights and our thoughts with each other briefly. And then I'm going to open to the questions, the wonderful questions that we've gotten from the audience so far. I hope with some help from Monica, who's going to help me sort through the great questions we've gotten so far. So the place that I'd like to start, just from my own interest, is one of the systems that I reported on in automating inequality was a system in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, which is the county where Pittsburgh is, was building a tool called the Allegheny Family Screening Tool, or the AFST. And the AFST is a model that is supposed to be able to predict which children might be victims of abuse or neglect sometime in the future. And there's a great deal of controversy about this system on the ground in Pittsburgh, as you might imagine. I spent close to half a year there talking to designers and to frontline workers in Children, Youth, and Family Services, but also talking to parents who had been impacted by Child Protective Services. And one of the questions I asked all of the parents was like, hey, look, I know that you've had complicated relationships with human caseworkers in the system in the past. Particularly in Allegheny County, there have been very serious problems around racial discrimination in decision-making in child and family services there. So, like, if we could get a machine that was perfectly unbiased and made decisions not based in the bias that you've had from human caseworkers in the past, which would you prefer? The machine, the perfect unbiased machine, or the imperfect biased humans? And every single one of the parents said, I'd rather have a human being making decisions about my family. And then I asked them, I was like, okay, so why? Why is that your preference? And to a person, all of them said, look, you can't argue with the number. Basically, their concern was that the lack of human contact in the system meant that their context was forgotten, the complexity of their life was ignored, and fundamentally they felt deeply dehumanized by this tool that was supposed to be able to predict whether or not they were a danger to their children. So the question that I want to ask all of our panelists is, one of the reasons that governments talk about creating these systems are in like emergency situations, like the situation we're in around the COVID pandemic. One of the reasons they give is to improve efficiency and accuracy. And sometimes they also talk about questions around rooting out bias in their systems. But it seems like the people who face the most important impacts of these tools aren't often consulted in what they want. So how do we resolve this problem that often these tools are created to help people who then say, we actually never wanted that specific kind of help? Like, how do we start to really address that issue in the way we do our work? And I'm happy to let anyone take this, and I won't call on you because it's not school. Christian, please.
Let me start off but be very, very brief. I think it's a great question, Virginia. I think one of the problems here is that you need to be interested in an answer to that question in order to answer it well. And what I've seen in many cases, for instance, when we were looking at universal credit in the United Kingdom and how that was a digital welfare service. This is the UK's main benefit system where you have to apply and maintain your benefits mostly online. I think at the end of the day, that system wasn't designed taking into account how it would impact poor people. And so if no one in central government is really interested in that question, you're not going to be able to answer it. You're not going to find the good method to, to figure it out. You're going to cite a few general statistics on internet uses in your country, and that's it. That's what happened in the UK in a nutshell. So I think we can talk all about how you can, make sure that a consultation goes well and everyone's views taken into account, but that assumes that there's a political interest in answering that question. And I think that's the alpha and the omega of this. In many cases, government just doesn't care about answering that question.
Tammy, please.
So in my case, I wouldn't feel confident in a computer making that decision. Computers, as we know, aren't exactly, what's the word? I'm trying to think of a word. Reliable. The internet cuts out, the autocorrect corrects words that aren't even what you want. But also, you can't really do the cases. I mean, I've had good and bad social workers. We've had good and bad cases. Each time we've won, and yes, it hurts. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's causes trauma to the family, not just you, but to everyone in your family. But if you don't have that, you need to build a relationship with social workers, and that's what we should be concentrating on, is building the relationship with, the social workers that come into your home. They're only in for 5 minutes. It's not something, you can't know someone after 5 minutes, so that would be my answer to your question, Virginia, and it's a very good question. If you don't mind, can I answer one of the questions that's been put to me? Is that okay?
Please do, yeah.
Okay, so there's actually a couple. I've got to find them now. There was one that was said about how can we, where's it gone? Sorry, I'm trying to find the question. I saw it and I've lost it. I'll come back. I'll come back and let someone else answer for the minute.
Perfect. Esther, I don't want to put you on the spot, but there's a great question for you that's come through. People are curious if you've shared your experience of your grandchildren with teachers and social workers, and whether you've been able to see them personally, or if that interaction has been also over the internet or the telephone, and what their response has been like. So what's your experience as a grandmother been like in trying to communicate these challenges?
Unmute here. Well, so far I'm getting my niece do Zoom contact with her. Hopefully I get her in March. And the other 3 that are upbringing, the parents were never in their lives, but it's kind of hard. But I did that on my own. I didn't have CYDF involved. I even tried calling to see if they could help me with certain things, but I end up getting it on my own. Just going, because I live in the county, and then on the reservation, I would go to the reservation. They tell me go back to Gala, which is city, but I was in the middle because I live in the county. So I was always getting the runaround, go to the tribe, or the tribe would tell me go to the city. And I'm like, this is crazy. It's hard because I was in the county line. But other than that, with my grandchildren, I'm teaching them to volunteer, and that's very important to me. And I bring them along so they know what what kind of work I do, and I enjoy doing it. So with them, it's like, do you get paid for it? I go, no, I don't. Then why do it? And I said, it's the joy of helping. So they learn, they all learn the experience of what I do, and they like it. So yay, Fourth World, ATD.
Thank you so much, Esther. I really appreciate that. Before I move on to some of these other great questions that we're getting from the audience, I wonder if any of the panelists have questions for each other for things that were raised as you listened to each other's experience. Yeah, Mr. Shin.
Sorry, before moving on to the question between each other, I'd like to answer to your question, which is really interesting. So partially, I agree with the Professor Christian. Government officers also had a truly heartfelt attachment and obligation to our citizens. So we try to invent the best system to working for them. But as you know, there are many factors we cannot consider. So, and it could be some factors potentially affect citizens, potentially affect the public, private-public relations. So some cases and sometimes those unseen factors matters. So that is the reason people cannot fully believe, as you mentioned, that unbiased, the fully independent mechanism to give them perfect answer. But sometimes people cannot believe because there are some factors which can be unseen. So for example, impact from a factor could be much larger than vulnerable groups than the normal citizens. So people had a worry about this. So that's the reason they want to have active engagement, not only just being labeled, they want to participate. They want to make their voice to increase this. But really nice question.
Thank you so much. So I've heard two sort of patterns emerging already that I just want to note. And these are things that people who study and experience these systems often raise. Esther, I heard you raising a question around accountability of these systems, that often when particularly human services becomes digitized, it becomes very easy for one voice on a voicemail system to tell you to go to another voice on another voicemail system. And it's very hard to communicate with someone who knows your whole story. So that becomes a real issue in accessing services and other things you need. And then Mr. Shin, I think, also raises this question of transparency, of what kinds of expertise need to be in a room when we're making decisions about whether we're going to use these systems or not, and what those systems might look like. So those are just two big patterns that I'm seeing so far. So I'd like to, unless Tammy, are you raising there? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I found the question. So it was a lady called Jeanette asked, has it been possible to raise it with the court system? From my understanding, yes, there is a report out and it's been put into, there was a report done into the newspaper as well. So they are aware of what's going on, which leads me then to Christian's question. And he said, do you believe that we should stop digital technologies in child protection systems? And my answer there is, in a nutshell, yes. I do not believe that the hearing should be heard from a court online. They should not. One, it's, you know, as I said in my talk, it's to do with the fact you don't know who's online. And there's a lot of domestic violence cases that end up in court. And so, you know, you have this parent alliance, can't think of the word now, you know, and so they'll use it against each other, and then that's not going to do the child any good anyway. But also the fact that why can't the cases when they get to court are so complex, you know, and from my experience, even with the work that I do, a lot of the reports that go into the court are wrong. Even in our case, they were wrong. You know, there was stuff that was written that wasn't true. And the only time that if you're going to have to do it, that it should be done, is if a child is, you know, getting beaten to the point where they're going to die if there's not something done. It shouldn't just be cases where, you know, as much as it's hard to have a case open and it's hard to have social workers in your life, as I say, we were lucky we won our case, but if I had to do it online, I would have preferred my case to carry on rather than do it online and not be able to put my body language forward, if that makes sense. So yes, I do believe that it shouldn't be done online unless a child is in complete danger, because it's not fair. You haven't got your solicitor, you haven't got any support, and it's just not human rights are violated. And if you haven't got the right equipment, then that's not fair either. You know, I'm not being funny. Lawyers, judges, solicitors, social services, they all have laptops. A lot of families don't have laptops. A lot of families don't have anything that they can use, and some weren't even on a video call. It was just a phone. You know, they were actually not even on a video. They were just talking through a phone and listening to it through a phone. How's that right? That's not right. So that is my answer to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tammy. I'm going to give our panelists an opportunity to ask each other questions, and then I'm going to come back with a question from the audience for Christian. I'm a teacher who leans into the long, slow silence because I think it brings the shy up to the surface.
My question was already answered, Virginia, so I'll take a back seat if you don't mind.
Okay. So let's move to a question then for Mr. Shin. Can you say more about the accessibility index and on the data collection process that you talked about in your comments?
Sure, thank you, Virginia. So since 2002, we established a special agent, a special government branch to help people to understand digital skill more easily. And then we expand this digital learning center to every corner of the nation. And one measure among them is making the digital divide index to have a research to every year. We, according to the research result, we can see how much accomplishments we made. So when it comes to the digital divide index, the agent called NIA has been measuring internet usage and non-usage among the disadvantaged group, such as vulnerable people. The index incorporates with the 3 dimensions of digital divide, such as access, do they can access the Wi-Fi or not, and the skills, do they can turn it on the workstation and can log in their homepage or not, and utilization. Can they make a PPT file with this? Can they make a Word file of this? So we use this 3 dimension to check out whether those people are good at using digital skills or not. So in order to fully understand where the gap exists, we make that index and follow every year. And then when it comes to the digital learning center, as like every country, we had a small local government branch center where you can go and you can take the birth certificate and you can take the other minor government papers in the small local government center. But as digitalization is moving on, the need to the local center has been decreased because people can log in with the website and directly they can print out birth certificate and other minor papers. So we transform those government local branches into education center. For example, elder people, sometimes they want to know how to use the Facebook. The young people, it's like a water. They use the Facebook every time. Whenever they use it, they can log in YouTube, watch the YouTube video every day. But when it comes to the older people, elderly people, when it comes to the other people with the disabilities, they want to know how to log in, how to use the simple mechanism. So we make that a local government center into those digital literacy center. They have a class such as making your homepage or log into Facebook or log into Instagram. So even elderly people or people with no family, they can access to that learning center. It's a universal one. If you want to take this, as everyone can take it. So we hope this kind of education system help people in vulnerable enhance their digital skills and make more inclusive society with this.
Thank you so much. So this brings us to a really great question from the audience from Herman van Breen. And this is something that I saw as well when I was reporting in both in Skid Row and in South Los Angeles in homeless encampments or unhoused people's encampments, the sort of relationship between these systems and needs for documentation. Because of course, the great promise of digital systems or digital ID systems is that you won't have to keep this voluminous paper documentation of your existence anymore. But that, at least in my experience in homeless encampments in Los Angeles, was not the case. In fact, getting into these digital systems required a huge amount of paperwork that people really struggled to get together. And Mr. Van Breen raises that according to a UNICEF study, 1/4 of children under 5 years of age are not registered at birth. And statistical analysis clearly shows that unregistered children come from the poorest households and over time fail to attain a birth certificate. So the question that Mr. Van Breen is answering is about this sort of tension between the need to document your identity to get into digital systems that are supposed to document your identity. So I'm wondering if folks can comment on that tension. And Christian, this might be a place to talk a little bit more about the digital ID work that you guys have been doing as well.
Thanks so much, Virginia. I'll have a first go then. The question from Mr. Van Breen from Mr. Van Veen, by the way. That's a happy coincidence. Yeah, so we work a lot on digital ID systems, especially in African states. And you're right that the central idea behind this is a lot of people in Africa, about 500 million people in sub-Saharan Africa, do not have a form of official identity like a birth registration, birth certificate. And that is keeping them from, for instance, accessing their right to vote or the right to social assistance, to education, and so forth. And I think what you see then a lot in these discussions about digital technologies used by the state, the idea is, okay, we can resolve this problem if only we had a digital system for it. But that, first of all, I mean, at a very basic level, that implies that the problem here is one that can easily be solved. In other words, 500 million people in sub-Saharan Africa don't have a birth registration. The logic then goes because there's no digital system. But that is already, I think, where a lot of the reasoning goes wrong. A lot of people don't have birth registration is because they live in parts of Africa where the government doesn't want them to have birth certificates in the first place, because they're in a border region, because they're from a political group that the leading coalition doesn't like, and so on and so on. So first of all, we assume that the problem can be easily fixed with a technical solution, but in many cases, there's a political reason why people don't have birth certificates in the first place. Secondly, of course, in sort of an utopian world in which everyone has access to a smartphone and internet access, and where government is super competent and internet connectivity everywhere is great, you can imagine that it actually would be quite easy if you find a secure way of doing it, if everyone can, get an ID on their smartphone. And somehow every time you want to vote or get a benefit from the government, you just show your smartphone and you get it. Of course, that would be an ideal system. Unfortunately, even in Western countries, even in the UK or Ireland or the Netherlands, where I'm from, that's just not the baseline situation. There's a huge inequality in, as we said, access to infrastructure, access to devices, literacy. So if you introduce such a system now and make it mandatory, there's a lot of people who are going to be left out in that system by default. So I think, the question that is posed by Mr. Van Breen is often posed in those terms, and it almost seems like you're resisting progress if you have questions about that framing. But I think we need to start by those two questions. Is there even political will to do this? And secondly, how would you even do it given the current circumstances? And the final thing to say there is, for instance, when we were in the UK, we spoke to the government minister for digital, and they go like, sure, we take it very seriously that everyone can get online. We'll have a big infrastructure program. We're going to have internet everywhere in the country by 2040. The problem is a lot of government programs are making digital access relevant and required right now. So what are you going to do in the next 20 years then? So I think we need to probe those questions, because there's a lot of sort of hidden assumptions under them that we need to address before we can get to really answering that question.
Thank you so much, Christian. We're close to the end of our time, and I'd very much like to give Tammy and Esther a chance to have the last word here. So I wonder if either of you or both of you would like to reflect just very briefly on how we should be building human systems, whether those are digital systems or in-person systems, that are accessible, that are humanizing, and that are fair based on the work that you've done in your home and in your communities. What lessons do you think people joining us on this seminar today should take away from your experience? Esther, please, just let's unmute you so we can hear you. Okay. There you are.
Yeah, sharing information with each other from different organizations. That's what helps me. I mean, that's what I learned a lot from, because you just can't just see the outline of it. It's like can't put CYDF as a bad, the bad organization, but they're there for it to be helping other people. They're not the bad guys always. And just a lot of information and sharing it among others. And I think that's how it spreads, more sharing. And that's what I'm here, like they have the same problem as we do, but in different circumstance. So that's what I got.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your work and your wisdom.
Thank you.
Tammy?
Hiya. So I suppose in one thing there's a question that I would like to answer, if that's okay. So it comes from Paula, I think it was. Oh, sorry, Pauline. Sorry, Pauline. And she's asking, how do you see things moving forward in supporting families who are going through court proceedings in the Child Protection Service? And I think that's kind of like this kind of thing that you were just on about, Virginia. So I believe that parent advocacy is the way forward. It is something that is very, 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 very close to my heart, and I do it now anyway. But parents have been through the system. I suppose what people have got to understand is, if they've not been through it, is that if you look at a table, so like you take this conference for instance, you're in a kind of conference and you've got everyone against you and no one with you. So you think you've got the social workers that are making these presumptions that you're doing something wrong when you're not. Even if you ask for help, you are deemed to be the one that's in the wrong. And then you've got all the others that go along with them because they're professionals. So as far as anyone else is concerned, professionals know everything and families don't know anything. And yet It's the families that are living with their children 24/7. It's the families that are doing, when you've got a child with special needs or an illness, it's the families that are staying up all night while that child's ill, or can't let them go to sleep because you can't go to sleep because you've got to watch that child to make sure they're safe and they're not going to hell. And then you've got these social workers that come in for 5 minutes, and it's a well-known fact that children will, as with anyone, you know, you can put up a face for 5 minutes. It's not hard to do. I've done it many times, you know, and that is one of the things that people have got to realize is this is real life. It's not just something that someone's written a report that's come from someone else. And it's like Chinese whispers. It goes from one bit to another bit to another bit. And by the time it gets to the bit where it actually matters, there's so many lies that have gone through these reports. And then the parents are having to fight, not just with the crisis that they're in, because that's what it is. That's what a crisis is. You know, say you've got a child that's trying to commit suicide. You're trying to deal with that. But at the same time as you're trying to deal with the fact that your child does not want to live, you've got these other people saying, well, actually, you know, it's your fault, or you're not doing it properly. Well, we don't get training. We're not professionals. We're doing a job that we need to do to keep our children safe. And I will always fight for my children. I've done it for 20 years and I will carry on doing it, you know, and this is where a lot of people, and that's why I do the work that I do. And I think that people really need to start building relationships and not judging families when they come into a home, and, you know, and just do something that's, if you don't agree with something, stand up. Don't let it ruin families. Don't let it rip families apart when there is no reason for it. And a lot of people don't even realise what's going on with the Child Protection Service because they've never been through it. And they think, oh yeah, it's great, great, great. They're there to support you. And 9 times out of 10, yeah, maybe. But you'll get that 100 cases where they're not. They're out there to get what they can. And that's got to stop. You cannot keep treating families the way that people are being treated. It is immune, it's inhuman, and it's against human rights. And I will do everything that I can to give the parents the power to fight against that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Tammy and Esther and Kristen and Jungho, thank you so much for your participation in the panel, your thoughts and your experience today. We're just a minute or two over time, so I just want to give you a little information about how you can continue to be involved with the work of ATD Fourth World. There's 2 things coming up very soon. One is folks who are registered for this seminar will get 2 reports soon. The first will just be a record of the text of the conversation, and then there will be an interactive report to follow. So keep an eye out for those reports coming to you soon. You can also get involved with ATD Fourth World through People's University, and they have an event on February 26th on the theme of digital technology as well. So if this amazing conversation has fired your interest, that might be a way to follow up and to continue to be involved. So thanks so much to ATD Fourth World for convening this important conversation, to each of our panelists, and to you all, 140 plus people from all over the world still out there listening. Thank you so much for your time, for your kind attention, and for your important work. We appreciate you, and we hope you have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.